So what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be taking you through 9 different ways to either expedite or add on to increasing your equity in your property. So number 1, let's start with paying down your mortgages. Obviously, the easiest one to do is to pay down your mortgage faster. So you have 2 ways of doing that. You can either pay it down more frequently, where most people pay it down once a month. You can pay it down 2 times a month, 3 times a month, depending on how you've got it structured with your bank. You can pay it in lump sums, so you're taking off a big chunk of your mortgage payments, or you can just pay more at a time. Right? So instead of paying $2,000 for your mortgages, you can pay $2,500 for your mortgages or $2,600 for your mortgages. Every dollar counts because of something called time value of money. So what happens is that every dollar that you wait to pay later on has an added amount of time and interest on it. Right? So if whatever dollar you're going to be paying at like your 70th mortgage payment is going to be much more expensive than what you're going to be paying today. So what happens is that you can actually pay down a lot more interest on your mortgage if you pay it off earlier rather than later, right? Because whatever dollar that you have as outstanding debt, like your mortgage, the longer you wait on paying it off, the more interest is accrued upon it. The earlier you pay it off, the less dollars you have in debt, that's accumulating interest, right? So if you have, say, $500 that you want to pay over the course of 10 years, you're paying off a lot more interest than if you were to pay that off in 5 years or 7 years or 8 years, right? Because every time you pay that just a little earlier, you're saving that payment from having interest added onto it. Right? So that's number 1. You can either pay it faster, or you can pay it in lump sums, or you can pay it even more often. Right? So doing it more often, it's the same, most of the time it's the same split. So if it's $2,000 a month you're paying, you can pay it bi-monthly, $1,000 every other week, or you can pay it even weekly. Between your month and a week, it doesn't really create too much of a difference, but pay it more often just so that you're making the payments faster, and that's affecting your bottom line on your interest. So number 2 is renovations, additions, general maintenance, and touch-ups. So let's go through all 4 of them. The first one is renovations. Obviously, whenever you do any sort of renovations on a property, when it comes to your housing, your ceiling, your paint job, any sort of exterior work, interior work, that always adds more value to the property. Now be aware, it doesn't always add a $1 of cost to $1 of value, but that's still value added. So where you want to stop is before you start adding too much to the property. Like, you don't need 2 pools, right? You don't need 2 movie theaters. You don't need 2 sets of driveways or 8 different parking spots, right? So you need to figure out in your neighborhood, comparatively, what can you add that's just a little bit better than everybody else's, so that the value at the end of the day can be perceived to sellers much more better, and also the bank. The next thing is additions. These additions are something that are things that are much larger. Stuff like pools, stuff like extra levels to a house. You might want to add like a sunroom. You might want to add something that's going to be changing the foundation of the property. You can add an extension to the ground floor. You can add like a barn if you live on a farm, I don't know. So anything that's going to be adding extra structural changes to the property, anything that's very large, that's going to be considered an addition. And additions are generally good depending on the type of neighborhood you're in. So you don't want to create something that's just going to stand out in a wrong way, right? So if the whole neighborhood is averaging around $700,000 or so, and you know what, you decide, I'm going to put in a pool for $75,000, and you think that's going to increase your value when your house should have a lot more renovations done to it internally, but you decide to take on this addition, right? That extra $75,000, it won't work out to a 1-to-1 because your neighborhood's demographic and your neighborhood's asset class, it isn't equivalent to the property that you're trying to have set up. So that's a theory that shows that if a property is really nice, the guy probably made a custom built property for about $5 million, but the neighborhood is just absolute garbage, that property's value actually diminishes. But if the house is really garbage, it's worth next to nothing, you can construct it in $200,000, but it's in the middle of multi-million-dollar properties, that property is worth a lot more because of the land that it's surrounded by, right? So it works in both inverses. Now, when you end up going back to other things that you can add on to your property to make them look good, things like solar panels can help the property. Usually it's for the cost-cutting aspect of things, but Some people see the value in it, some people don't. So generally buyers don't really see too much of a value in it, even though sellers have a very large emphasis on having that on their property. How much of a cost savings it creates it's quite significant, but it's very expensive to put up front for the roof. So you've got to look at your cost analysis to see if it even makes any sense to purchase it. Next, we're going to look at general maintenance. So general maintenance is stuff that's, small little touch-ups, making sure stuff is clean, making sure the light bulbs are replaced if they're breaking, if the door is creaking, oil it up. Nothing major, probably cost you a few $100s for the entire house, if that. And it's just there so that your house is pretty much up to date. It's not breaking down on every other corner. If you have any sort of cracks, in your foundation, you should probably get that looked at, because that can lead to leaks in your basement. That's something you obviously want to avoid. And finally, just touch-ups. So something that's more of an aesthetic little touch-up, like you can have something like a painting or wallpaper, rugs, some things that are, even if you change the light lamps, the fixtures, stuff like that, something that's small, it's going to look good, it's tastefully added. You're not going to put like a disco ball in the middle of your house, right? So something like that can actually make a difference. It'll look good, it's not that expensive, but it's nothing that's really mandatory. Number 3, the market. So the market's always going to increase value of the property if the market has enough people coming into it, if there is a lack of supply, if there is an increased amount of demand, and if the neighborhood is a strong neighborhood, right? So there's going to be some neighborhoods that just stay stagnant for about 8 years until some developer comes, tries to buy up the block, and then rejuvenate the neighborhood. But until then, most of the asset classes do end up staying flatline. Now, it's fairly common to assume that, real estate makes money no matter where you are. It's true, real estate will make you money, right? If you want to stay in it for about 55 years. Some types of real estate, some types of locations will take that long for you to make some sort of decent money. Other times, you should be timing the market for real estate. You should be timing the asset classes that come out. You should be looking at the types of properties that come out. So getting into these sorts of pockets or these types of investments will help accelerate the portfolio, and it helps you to get to your goal a lot faster rather than just picking a piece of real estate in the middle of nowhere and hoping it grows. The next thing you can do is you can rent out your unit. Say for example, it's a basement, or you might have a separate unit outside, or even if it's like a garage, self-made unit that you can rent out for some certain purposes, like if you want to have a bland practice there. You can rent out your parking spots. You might be able to rent out a part of your property so that a utility service provider can come and use the space. But there's different sorts of ways you can create income by having different parcels of your land or different portions of your property rented out. Then you'd use that use that money to pay off more of your debt to accelerate those payments, and thereby further increasing your equity. Number 5 is changing your interest rates on your mortgage debt. So obviously everyone wants to have the cheapest mortgages. People ideally want to have 0%, but you're obviously never going to get that, not in this climate. Well, who knows, you might. But the purpose of this is to pretty much have a lower interest payment on your month-to-month payments, so that majority of your mortgage payments can go towards your principal, right? So the thing that you want to evaluate is, if I change my mortgage contract from, let's say it's 1.9%, and currently in the market it might have 1.47%. If I make this 43% change, is what I'm going to be saving worth me canceling my mortgage to get another mortgage? Because most mortgages end up having clauses in them that state that you can't cancel the mortgage before a certain date, or you can't pay off a large lump sum or make advanced payments before a certain amount is paid off, right? So just be aware of that contract. But if you can do it, work it out, work out the analysis. If it makes sense, why not? Go ahead with it. You'll save more in the long run. Number 6 is phased equity growth. What this pretty much means is that this is specific to pre-construction projects, condos, townhouses, houses, whatever it is. If a project or a property is, most of the time if it's in a multi-phase unit, or if it's like a regular condo project, what's going to happen is that there's going to be waves of product that gets released. When these waves of products get released, what happens is that on the first batch, usually the platinum or the VIP phases, you end up having, say, the houses or condos are sold for $100,000, right? what's going to happen is that a limited amount of inventory is going to be put out there for these brokers to sell to clients. At the next phase, when there's less inventory to come out and the developer, waits a week or a few days or however long he's going to wait, at the next phase, or at phase 2 release, in which case they might wait a few months to release, the developer is going to be coming out with a different set of products, like a different set of properties. In these sets of properties, what usually happens is that there's anywhere between a 5 to 10% increase in most cases in Ontario. There's a 5 to 10% increase in the cost of this purchase, right? So with this cost of purchase, what happens now is that the previous product that you have, it'll be fairly comparative to the second phase that came out, and the third and the fourth and the fifth, depending on how many they have come out. But if your product is fairly similar to these other phases progressively, then what's going to happen is that the bank or the appraiser or whoever is out in the market is going to see that, I'm seeing 4 or 5 different properties that were 3,000 square foot each, and they look fairly the same, but this property is selling for about 1.8. This property is also selling for about 1.8, 1.85. I'm gonna go with the 1.8. The reason that first property is going to be making so much more money is because it was bought in at, say, $100,000. Everything else was forcefully appreciated, right? This is phased equity growth. The developer's costs while he's waiting for the bank, while he's doing his construction, is adding up, right? Plus now there's a lack of inventory in that project. So what's going to happen is that with both of these factors in place, the developer forces the cost of the next set of units that come out so that the next buyer has to pay more, right? So he can recoup more money from his project and make more profit sometimes. So they'll continue to do this until they're at the last phase. Most of the times the last phase is the estate release, or these sorts of units that are penthouses, are extremely large, extremely expensive, but those are usually what's saved till the end. But that's pretty much how phased equity growth happens. So you can just sit there and wait. That's how condo investments take place. People buy condos and they sit for 4 or 5 years. The product might be worth $400,000 when they bought it. By the time it's ready in about 4 or 5 years, it's probably worth $700,000, $600,000, whatever it's going to be. They can either sell it or they can refinance a portion of that new equity and go purchase something else, right? And wait, or purchase something and let it cash flow. Now, these are just different types of strategies that are out there, a few of the very many. So it just depends on what you're looking for. But most investors go with just a buy and hold strategy, buy and hold to try to create equity. The only drawback in that is that if you're purchasing in the same sorts of areas, A, you'll never cash flow because they're just so expensive in the GTA. B, when you have a lot of these properties in the same area, it sort of opens you up to a sensitivity in the market. This can go either way. So either the market can be really good and all of your assets are booming, or just like right now we're in downtown Toronto, the market's really bad and now all your assets are crashing. Number 7 is property conversions. So property conversions and tear downs can be used to create a higher class of property. Not to say one class is better than the other, but higher use. So you can have single family use, you can have multifamily use, you can have commercial use. Depending on how you want to recreate this property's use, you need to go through zoning approvals, and which takes a very long time. It's very expensive, and you need to see, is the timeline that I'm going to be putting in plus the cost I'm going to be putting in enough to give me a profit, so that in 4 or 5, 10 years, when I sell these units, either segregate these units and then sell them, or even as a whole, will it be worth my time, right? So when you end up creating a higher use property for your asset that you currently have, it may or may not be of equity growth. The reason for that is that you can't really put up a commercial unit in a residential zone. You can put it up in an industrial zone, but if everything else is just metalwork and you put up an office right in the middle of it, no one wants it. What's the point of doing that? You've now just reduced the comparative equity in that property, right? Because if, for example, your property originally was worth $500,000, we're disregarding any sort of cash we have in the property. If it was worth $500,000 and now you change the zoning from industrial to office, and there's no office around, the closest office around is probably worth 300,000. You've now reduced the value of your asset because no one wants it, right? So it'll go one of two ways. Just make sure you know the area that you're in and what you're targeting. And that goes the same for tear downs, rebuilds. So you can tear down your property, especially if it's an old, rusty, ugly looking one. Say for example, you bought it for 700,000, tear down, rebuild for add another 350, and you're now at 1050. You can sell it for about 1.2, 1.3. That'll generate you some pretty good cash flow. But again, can you end up managing that whole project in that little bit of a time frame? Right? So these are just considerations that you want to have. Now we're on number 8. So now we're going to be talking about land conversions. Land conversions can come in one of two ways. Either you're going to be converting the land for its use, for example, its zoning, to be, you're going to change it from something like farming to residential development, and then you're going to parcel off the land and sell it, or sell it as a whole to a developer, whoever. Or you're going to be getting that piece of land, converting it to the residential or commercial, whatever you want to convert it to, building on it, and then selling it off. Right? So you can do it one of two ways, but either way you do it, depending on where you're located, you can end up increasing value tremendously just by changing the zoning on a property. It can go from $1 million to about $25 million. I've seen that happen maybe 2 times. Once it was for a hotel, and the other one was for a residential townhouse development. So it'll depend on which one you want to do. Just make sure the location is correct and where you are targeting, the demographic and the demand is there for it. And number 9, the last one, is reducing your mortgage payments or your timelines. So instead of having your mortgage due in 25 years, it just makes sense, if you can afford it, to reduce it to 23, 22, 20, 19, whatever you can reduce it to. It'll end up helping you quite a bit on your interest payments plus principal payments. Now your mortgage payments are larger, so a larger portion of that goes towards your principal and a larger portion goes towards your interest, right? That's why you can pay it off faster. So those are the 9 ways you can help increase the equity in your property or help speed up the process. If you have any requests on anything you'd like to see next, feel free to give me a shout, like and comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.